The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Chicago O'Hare International Airport as Alex checked his phone one last time. Gate B-17, he muttered, adjusting the worn backpack on his shoulder. At 17, this would be his first solo flight, and his heart raced with equal parts excitement and nervousness. He'd been saving up for months, working weekends at his uncle's grocery store, just to afford this standby ticket to San Francisco. His grandmother had been begging him to visit since she moved there last year, and spring break finally gave him the perfect chance. The night before, he barely slept, double and triple checking his documents, making sure his ID hadn't mysteriously vanished. The boarding area buzzed with the usual airport energy. Business travelers typing furiously on laptops, families trying to keep their children entertained, and flight attendants striding purposefully through the terminal. Alex found himself people-watching, imagining their stories. A little boy nearby was pressing his face against the window, pointing excitedly at every plane that taxied past. When his row was finally called, Alex joined the line, ticket clutched tightly in his hand. He'd scored a middle seat. Not ideal, but beggars couldn't be choosers with standby tickets. Besides, it was just a 4-hour flight. He could handle sitting between strangers for that long. The plane's interior had that distinct airplane smell, a mixture of coffee, recycled air, and cleaning supplies. Alex shuffled down the narrow aisle, counting row numbers under his breath. His seat, 23B, waited between a businessman already deep in his newspaper and an elderly woman knitting something purple. As he stowed his backpack in the overhead compartment, Alex couldn't help but smile. Everything was going perfectly according to plan. He'd texted his mom that he'd made it through security, sent his grandmother his flight details, and even remembered to pack his motion sickness pills, though he hoped he wouldn't need them. Settling into his seat, Alex pulled out his phone to take a quick first solo flight selfie for his social media. His best friend had dared him to document every step of his journey, and he wasn't about to back down from that challenge. Just as he was about to switch his phone to airplane mode, a shadow fell across his seat. He looked up to find a flight attendant standing in the aisle, her expression unreadable. "Excuse me," she said, leaning in slightly. "Could you come with me for a moment? There seems to be an issue with your seating arrangement." Alex's stomach dropped. He'd heard about airlines overselling flights, but never imagined it would happen to him, especially not on his first solo trip. As he unbuckled his seatbelt with slightly trembling hands, he had no idea that this apparent stroke of bad luck was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Little did he know, the next few minutes would transform him from a regular high school student into something entirely unexpected. But first, he had to gather his courage and follow the flight attendant back up that narrow aisle, feeling the curious eyes of other passengers following his every move. Following the flight attendant up the aisle felt like the longest walk of Alex's life. Other passengers glanced up from their books and phones, some with sympathy in their eyes, others just curious about the unfolding drama. The businessman in his row had finally looked up from his newspaper, offering an awkward half-smile as Alex fumbled to grab his backpack from the overhead bin. "I'm really sorry about this," the flight attendant said quietly as they reached the front of the plane. Her name tag read Linda, and she genuinely seemed apologetic. "There's been an overbooking situation, and we need to reseat a few passengers." She kept her voice low, trying to spare Alex any extra embarrassment. Standing in that narrow space near the cockpit, Alex felt his face grow hot. He triple-checked everything: his ticket confirmation, the gate number, even his seat assignment. Yet here he was, being asked to leave. His grandmother's excited face flashed through his mind. She was probably already planning what to cook for his first dinner in San Francisco. "But I checked in online," Alex protested, trying to keep his voice steady, "and my seat was confirmed." He pulled out his phone, fingers shaking slightly as he opened the airline app to show her his booking. The screen glowed mockingly with his confirmed seat assignment, 23B. Linda nodded sympathetically. I understand, and you did everything right. Sometimes these situations happen due to system errors. We'll absolutely compensate you and get you on the next available flight. She paused, noticing Alex's crestfallen expression. We're also offering travel vouchers and meal tickets for the inconvenience. As Alex followed her back into the terminal, his mind raced. Should he call his mom? His grandmother? How long would he have to wait for another flight? The bright airport lights felt harsh after the dimmer plane cabin, and the bustling sounds of the terminal seemed to mock his predicament. At the gate desk, Linda started typing into her computer, probably looking for alternative flights. Alex stood there, clutching his backpack strap, trying not to look as disappointed as he felt. A small group of passengers waiting for the next flight watched the scene unfold with interest. I've been flying for 40 years, a voice suddenly said beside him. And I'd never seen someone handle being deplaned with such grace. Alex turned to find an elegantly dressed older woman watching him with an intrigued expression. There was something about her presence that commanded attention. Maybe it was her perfectly pressed suit or the confident way she carried herself. My mom always says there's no point making a bad situation worse, Alex replied, attempting a smile. It was something she drilled into him since he was little, usually when he was throwing tantrums about not getting his way at the grocery store. The woman's eyes sparkled with interest. That's quite mature for someone your age. Tell me, do you fly often? She introduced herself, but not in the casual way people usually do. There was purpose in her question, though Alex couldn't figure out why she was so interested in his flying habits. Little did Alex know, but this conversation, sparked by his unfortunate removal from the plane, was about to lead him down a path he never could have imagined. Sometimes, the worst moments in life have a funny way of opening doors to the most incredible opportunities. The elegant woman introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, and something about her presence made Alex forget about his flight troubles for a moment. Standing there in the busy terminal, surrounded by the constant hum of travelers and announcements, they fell into an unexpectedly easy conversation. Actually, I work at the local airport on weekends, Alex found himself saying. Just basic stuff. Cleaning planes, restocking supplies. But I love every minute of it. His eyes lit up as he spoke about his part-time job, the one his friends thought was boring but felt like an adventure to him every time he stepped onto the tarmac. Mrs. Chen leaned against the gate counter, her interest clearly growing. Really? Tell me more about that. What made you choose to work at an airport of all places? The way she asked made it feel less like small talk and more like she was genuinely curious about his answer. Well, Alex chuckled, running a hand through his hair. Most kids my age want to work at the mall or fast food places. But I've been obsessed with planes since I was little. He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo he'd taken last week. A sunset silhouetting a plane taking off. Even when I'm just cleaning, I get to learn how everything works. The pilots sometimes let me sit in the cockpit during breaks and explain all the instruments. As he spoke, more and more of his passion spilled out. He told her about the app he developed that helped his coworkers track their cleaning schedules more efficiently, and how he'd suggested changes to make the passenger boarding process smoother for families with young children. Mrs. Chen listened intently, occasionally nodding and asking surprisingly specific questions about airline operations. Something about her manner made Alex wonder if she knew more about the industry than she was letting on. She seemed particularly interested in his ideas about making air travel more appealing to younger passengers. You know, she said thoughtfully, checking her watch, I was supposed to be on a conference call right now, but this is far more interesting. She pulled out a business card from her leather portfolio. Not the flimsy kind people usually hand out, but thick, expensive-looking paper with embossed lettering. I've been in the airline industry for longer than you've been alive, she revealed, handing him the card. Alex's eyes widened as he read her title, CEO of Skybridge Airlines, a regional carrier he'd heard of but never flown. And I haven't heard such fresh perspectives in years. Alex stood there, stunned, the business card feeling weighty in his hands. All those hours spent dreaming about planes while his friends played video games. All the early morning shifts at the airport that his classmates thought were weird. Suddenly, they didn't seem so strange. Mrs. Chen glanced at the gate where Alex's original flight was now pushing back from the terminal. Sometimes, she said with a knowing smile, missing a flight can lead to catching something much better. She paused, seeming to make a decision. How would you like to grab a coffee? I have a rather unusual proposition for you. As they walked toward the airport cafe, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another adult being nice to a kid who'd had a rough day. There was something more here, something that made his heart race with possibility. He'd started the day thinking he was heading to San Francisco, but fate, it seemed, had other plans entirely. The airport cafe buzzed with afternoon activity as Alex sat across from Mrs. Chen, warming his hands around a hot chocolate while she stirred her coffee. The smell of fresh pastries and espresso filled the air, creating a strange contrast to the life-changing conversation that was about to unfold. Skybridge Airlines has been in my family for 2 generations. Mrs. Chen began, setting her spoon down carefully. We've done well connecting smaller cities, but lately we've been losing younger travelers. They don't even consider us when booking flights. She paused, studying Alex's face. We're stuck in old ways of thinking, and it shows. Alex nodded, thinking about his own friends who always booked the cheapest flights they could find on their phones, not caring which airline they flew. Most people my age just use apps to find the lowest price, he admitted. They don't even look at airline names anymore. Exactly, Mrs. Chen said, leaning forward. And that's where you come in. I'm not looking for just ideas or consulting. I'm offering you something bigger. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. I want to make you a part owner of Skybridge Airlines. Alex nearly choked on his hot chocolate. I'm sorry. What? He looked around, half expecting to see hidden cameras. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. But I'm just a high school student. I don't know anything about running an airline. Mrs. Chen smiled, but her eyes remained serious. You know more than you think. That app you created for your cleaning crew, that's exactly the kind of innovation we need. Your ideas about making flying more appealing to young people, that's what we're missing. She opened the folder, revealing documents filled with numbers and legal terms Alex could barely understand. Of course, you'd have mentoring. You'd learn the business side while bringing your perspective to our operations. Your youth isn't a weakness here. It's exactly what makes you valuable. Alex's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the papers. There were figures with more zeros than he'd ever seen, proposals for board meetings, and terms he'd need to look up later. This is overwhelming, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Take your time, Mrs. Chen reassured him. Talk to your parents, consult with lawyers. I'm not asking for an answer today. She reached into her bag again, pulling out a business card holder. These are the contact details for my legal team. They can explain everything in detail to your family. Looking down at his half-finished hot chocolate, Alex felt like he was in a dream. Just an hour ago, he'd been disappointed about missing his flight. Now he was being offered partial ownership of an airline. The universe had a strange sense of humor. Why me? He finally asked, looking up at Mrs. Chen. There must be hundreds of people with more experience who'd jump at this chance. Mrs. Chen's response was immediate. Experience isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need fresh eyes, someone who sees possibilities where others see problems. When I watched how you handled being deplaned, with grace, maturity, and understanding, I saw something special. Then hearing your passion for aviation and your innovative ideas, it confirmed what my instincts told me. As the busy airport life continued around them, Alex sat there, trying to process how his spring break trip had turned into something straight out of a movie. Mrs. Chen gathered her things, standing up. Think about it. she said warmly. Sometimes the best opportunities come when we least expect them. Walking back through the terminal, Alex clutched the folder to his chest, his mind racing with possibilities. He had a lot of phone calls to make, starting with his parents. One thing was certain. This wasn't how he'd expected his day to go when he woke up this morning. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and more legal terminology than Alex had ever heard in his life. His parents' initial reaction of disbelief quickly turned to cautious excitement as they sat in their living room, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, talking to Mrs. Chen's legal team via video call. "So, let me get this straight," his dad said, adjusting his glasses as he peered at the documents. "You want our 17-year-old son to become a part owner of your airline." The skepticism in his voice was clear, but there was also a hint of pride. His mom sat nearby, taking detailed notes and asking surprisingly sharp questions about the business structure. The lawyers explained everything patiently: how Alex would own a significant minority stake, how his role would focus on modernizing the airline's approach to younger travelers, and how his education would remain the top priority. They even had plans for him to take business classes during summer breaks. Just as the reality of the situation started sinking in, Alex's phone buzzed. A friend had sent him a link that made his heart skip a beat. The video of him being deplaned had gone viral. Someone had captured the whole thing, from the moment the flight attendant approached him to his graceful exit. The comments section was flooded with people praising his mature handling of the situation. "Well," Mrs. Chen said during their next meeting, "it seems the universe is giving us free publicity." She didn't seem bothered by the video at all. In fact, she looked pleased. This could be the perfect launching point for our youth engagement initiative. Alex spent his evenings researching airline operations, watching industry documentaries, and sketching out ideas in his notebook. His best friend thought he was crazy to even consider it, but something about this opportunity felt right. You could literally change how young people travel, his friend admitted finally, helping Alex brainstorm ideas for youth-friendly booking systems. The school corridors buzzed with whispers as news of the viral video spread. Alex found himself explaining the situation to his teachers, who were surprisingly supportive. His economics teacher even offered to help him understand some of the business concepts he'd need to know. One evening, as Alex sat at the kitchen table surrounded by more paperwork, his mom brought him a plate of his favorite cookies. "You know," she said, sitting down beside him, "when you were 5, you used to line up your toys like airplane passengers and give them safety instructions." They both laughed at the memory. Maybe this isn't as crazy as it seems. The lawyers worked on creating a structure that would protect both Alex's interests and his education. Mrs. Chen insisted on including clauses about maintaining his grades and having time for normal teenage activities. "We're not just investing in a business partner," she explained. "We're investing in your future." As the papers started taking final form, Alex felt a mix of excitement and terror. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about potentially changing how an entire generation experienced air travel. His ideas about smartphone-based boarding passes, student discounts, and social media integration were already being discussed in serious business meetings. The weight of the opportunity hit him one night as he stood in his bedroom, looking at his collection of model airplanes. Each one represented a dream he'd had about flying, about being part of the aviation world. Now, in the most unexpected way, those dreams were becoming reality. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Mrs. Chen. The board meeting was scheduled for next week. They wanted him to present his vision for the airline's future. As he started preparing his presentation, Alex realized that missing that flight to San Francisco might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. The boardroom at Skybridge Airlines headquarters felt massive, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a perfect view of planes taking off and landing. Alex stood at the front, trying to keep his hands steady as he connected his laptop to the projector. His presentation was about to begin, and the room was filled with serious-looking executives in expensive suits. I've been thinking about this from a different angle, Alex began, his voice growing stronger with each word. Most airlines see young travelers as a problem to solve, but we should see them as our future. He clicked to his first slide, showing social media posts from frustrated young travelers. The board members leaned forward, some looking skeptical, others curious. Alex had spent weeks preparing for this moment, practicing in front of his mirror, his parents, and even his economics class. Now it was time to show them what a teenager could bring to their airline. Our current booking system takes 17 clicks to complete a reservation. Alex demonstrated, pulling up the airline's website. But my generation loses interest after 3. A few board members chuckled, recognizing their own children's behavior. I propose we rebuild it from scratch, focusing on simplicity and mobile-first design. As Alex moved through his presentation, showing mock-ups of a new app, social media integration ideas, and student discount programs, he could feel the energy in the room shifting. These weren't just theoretical ideas. He had data, cost projections, and implementation plans, all prepared with help from Mrs. Chen's team. But here's the most important part, Alex said, reaching his final slides. We're not just selling flights. We're selling experiences. He showed them concepts for in-flight Wi-Fi improvements, phone charging stations at every seat, and a rewards program specifically designed for young travelers. The presentation ended, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then the questions started. Tough questions about costs, implementation timelines, and potential risks. Alex had prepared for this too, answering each query with a mixture of teenage insight and business sense he developed over the past few weeks. Just as the meeting was wrapping up, breaking news alerts started buzzing on everyone's phones. The video of Alex being deplaned had been picked up by major news networks. Now everyone wanted to know more about the teenager who might become the youngest airline co-owner in history. Outside the boardroom, reporters had already gathered in the lobby. Mrs. Chen's PR team quickly whisked Alex through a side exit, but not before he caught glimpses of news vans parked outside. His phone was flooding with messages from friends, classmates, and even teachers. Back home that evening, Alex sat with his parents watching the news coverage. Teen's airline mishap turns into historic business opportunity. Read one headline. Another showed clips from his viral video, followed by business experts discussing the potential impact of having a teenage perspective in airline management. "Are you sure you're ready for all this?" his dad asked, watching Alex scroll through the seemingly endless social media notifications. The question hung in the air for a moment. Alex thought about everything that had happened since that day at the airport. The late nights studying business terms, the countless meetings, the presentation he'd just given. It was overwhelming, yes, but it also felt right. "I think I am," he replied, looking out their living room window at a plane passing overhead. "Besides, I've got you guys, Mrs. Chen, and a whole team of people helping me. And maybe this is exactly what the airline industry needs, someone who sees things differently." His mom squeezed his shoulder, pride evident in her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more decisions, and probably more media attention. But for now, Alex allowed himself to smile, thinking about how a simple flight delay had led to something so much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The transition from regular high school student to airline co-owner wasn't smooth sailing. Alex found himself juggling trigonometry homework with business meetings, and morning announcements were often interrupted by texts from the development team about the new booking app. But somehow, he was making it work. His school had been surprisingly accommodating. The principal agreed to let him take his final period as an independent study in business management, giving him time for afternoon meetings at Skybridge headquarters. His economics teacher even used his experience as real-world examples in class, much to Alex's embarrassment. The new app launches next week, Alex announced during a board meeting, now feeling more comfortable in the leather chair that had once seemed so intimidating. The boardroom had become his second home, though he still wore his lucky sneakers under the required business attire. The app was his baby, something he dreamed up during those long hours cleaning planes. It featured one-swipe booking for students, instant price matching, and even a feature that helped groups of friends coordinate their travel plans. "We're calling it Skybridge Youth," he explained, demonstrating how users could split payments for group tickets. But not everything was going smoothly. Some senior staff members still struggled with taking directions from a teenager. During one particularly tense meeting, an executive snapped, "What could you possibly know about running an airline?" Mrs. Chen had stepped in immediately. "He knows what our future customers want, which is exactly what we need right now." Her support never wavered, even when Alex's ideas seemed too radical for the old guard. The media attention had become part of daily life. News outlets loved the story, the teenager who went from being kicked off a plane to helping run one. Alex's parents helped him navigate the interviews, making sure he stayed grounded despite the growing attention. One morning, as Alex walked through the airport to another meeting, a young girl stopped him. "Are you the plane guy?" she asked excitedly. "My big sister showed me your video. She said if you can do big things, she can too." Moments like these reminded him why all the hard work mattered. The student discount program was proving particularly successful. College students were flocking to Skybridge, attracted by the easy-to-use app and youth-friendly policies. Alex had insisted on small but important changes, like flexible booking for exam periods and special rates for family visits. His own friends became unofficial focus groups, testing new features and providing brutal but honest feedback. "This button's in the wrong place," his best friend would say, or "nobody's going to read all that text." Their input was often more valuable than expensive market research. Between meetings, Alex still had to maintain his grades, a non-negotiable condition set by both his parents and Mrs. Chen. Sometimes, this meant studying in the back of cars between meetings or doing homework in airport lounges. His physics textbook became a constant companion in his briefcase. One day, while reviewing the latest app usage statistics, Alex noticed something interesting. Users weren't just booking more flights. They were engaging with the airline differently. They were sharing their travel stories, using the app's features to plan group trips, and actually choosing Skybridge over cheaper options because of the user experience. "This is what we were aiming for," he told Mrs. Chen, showing her the data. "We're not just selling seats anymore. We're building a community." She smiled, remembering their first conversation in the airport cafe that seemed so long ago. As he headed home that evening, Alex spotted a plane taking off against the setting sun. He remembered how he used to watch planes from his bedroom window, dreaming about being part of the aviation world. Now he was helping shape its future, one innovation at a time, all because of a canceled flight and someone who was willing to listen to a teenager's ideas. 1 year had passed since that fateful day at the airport, and Skybridge Airlines had transformed beyond recognition. Alex stood at the podium during the company's annual meeting, presenting the year's results to a room full of investors, board members, and media representatives. "When I was removed from that flight last year," Alex began, a smile playing on his lips, "I thought it was the worst luck ever. Turns out, it was the best thing that could have happened." The room chuckled, now familiar with the story that had made headlines across the country. The numbers on the screen behind him told an impressive story. Youth engagement had skyrocketed by 200%, with college students making up a significant portion of their new customer base. The Skybridge Youth app had been downloaded over 1 million times, and their student discount program was being copied by larger airlines. "But it's not just about the numbers," Alex continued, switching to a slide showing social media posts. "It's about changing how young people think about travel." He scrolled through posts of students using their group booking feature to plan spring break trips, family reunions organized through the app, and countless travel stories shared on their platform. The internship program had been particularly successful. High school and college students were getting real-world experience in aviation, bringing fresh perspectives to every department. Some of our best innovations came from our interns, Alex proudly announced, pointing to a list of implemented suggestions. Mrs. Chen watched from the front row, beaming like a proud mentor. The risk she'd taken on a teenager had paid off better than anyone could have expected. Skybridge was no longer seen as just another regional airline. It had become the go-to carrier for young travelers. After the presentation, Alex walked through the terminal of their main hub airport. The changes were visible everywhere. Charging stations designed by student interns, clear signage that actually made sense to first-time flyers, and ground staff wearing casual uniforms that his team had helped design. Near one of the gates, he spotted a group of college students using the app's group check-in feature, something he'd thought up during a particularly boring math class. They were laughing, taking selfies with their boarding passes, actually enjoying being at the airport. Back in his office, which still had his model airplanes displayed proudly on a shelf, Alex looked at a photo from that first day. He was standing in the terminal, looking confused and disappointed after being deplaned. Next to it was a recent magazine cover featuring him and Mrs. Chen, titled, "How a Teenager Revolutionized Air Travel." His phone buzzed with a message from his grandmother in San Francisco. He'd finally made that visit, though not as a regular passenger. He'd flown out on a Skybridge flight to open their new West Coast youth hub. "Proud of you, kiddo," her message read, along with a link to another article about the airline's success. As the sun set over the runway outside his window, Alex reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. He was still a high school student, now a senior planning for college, but he was also helping run an airline that was changing the industry. His crazy ideas about making flying fun and accessible for young people weren't so crazy after all. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Chen. "Ready for tomorrow's board meeting?" she asked. "We're discussing expansion plans for next year." Alex nodded, grabbing his tablet with the latest proposals. Walking through the terminal one last time that day, he passed the gate where it all began. A flight was boarding, and this time, he noticed something different. The passengers, young and old, were smiling, relaxed, actually enjoying the start of their journey. And that, he realized, was the biggest success of all.